I never thought I'd be here, typing this out for strangers. But here I am. I need to vent, and honestly, I don't even know what I want to hear from you all. Maybe just someone who gets it. I've been married to Stephanie for 6 years. We met in college and everything felt so easy back then. We had the same sense of humor, the same goals, the same idea of what we wanted our future to look like. It was idyllic. Honestly, I never questioned anything. I trusted her. Maybe I was naive, but I genuinely thought we had something solid. But lately, things have been off. Small things at first, nothing that seemed big enough to be alarmed about. A few late nights at work, texting a bit more than usual. The usual "I'm busy" excuses. The phone always face down when we're together. I tried to shrug it off because, I don't know, maybe I was overthinking it. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I wasn't one of those guys who gets insecure over every little thing. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband. But as weeks went by, the feeling grew. And then there was the night that tipped everything over. It was at her work party. You know the kind. Everybody's a little too dressed up, trying to have a good time after a long week. We'd been to a few of them together, and usually they were fun. This time, though, something felt different. It was almost like Stephanie was distant. She wasn't her usual self, joking around, dancing, and enjoying the night. She seemed distracted. I tried to ignore it at first. She was mingling, talking with coworkers, and I was just standing off to the side, nursing a drink and trying to act like everything was normal. But then he walked in. Jake. Jake was one of her coworkers, always the guy in the corner of the room, making everyone laugh with his dry humor. He wasn't bad-looking, and I guess I never thought much of him. But that night, it was like my gut knew exactly who he was the moment he walked in. Stephanie walked over to me with Jake beside her. I could tell something was off from the way she was holding herself. She had a slight smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I don't know, maybe I was imagining it. "Hey," she said, her voice light, almost too light. I smiled back, trying to keep things easy. "Hey, how's the party?" Jake spoke up before she could reply. "Are you her husband?" he asked, looking at me like he was sizing me up. "Yeah, I am," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Maybe he was just making small talk, right? He didn't seem to care much about the answer. "I'm going to dance with her now," Jake said, with a kind of cocky grin I hadn't seen from him before. Stephanie, without missing a beat, added, "You don't need his permission. Come on, Jake." And before I could even register what was happening, she was already turning to walk toward the dance floor with him. I stood there for a second, stunned. My mind was racing. Why did she say that? Why did she just let him take her hand like that without even looking at me? I could feel the anger rising in me, like a slow burn. I didn't move for a few moments, just watching them. And then, something snapped inside me. I walked over to them. I stood right there, in the middle of the dance floor, and I put my hand on her arm. "Don't even think about touching her with your dirty hands," I said, my voice low but firm. I don't know where the words came from, but they felt like they were coming from a place I didn't recognize. A place I was trying to suppress. Jake smirked. It wasn't a playful, innocent grin anymore. It was something else. Something that made my stomach churn. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't own her. I'll dance with her, and maybe more." And that's when it hit me. I didn't know if I wanted to punch him or just walk out of the room. Felt like everything was crashing down at once. Was I missing something? Was this really happening? But in that moment, standing there with the sound of music and laughter swirling around us, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. The question had shifted from, "Is something going on?" to "What the hell is going on here?" I don't know what came over me in that moment, but I snapped. I knew I had to get some answers, even if I wasn't sure I was ready for them. I looked at Stephanie, her face now pale, her smile replaced with an awkward expression. It was like she had no idea how to handle this confrontation, like she thought I wouldn't say anything. "Stephanie, what the hell is going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper but carrying every ounce of frustration I felt. Jake didn't say another word. He just gave me that look, a mix of superiority and a little too much amusement for my liking. He knew something I didn't, and it made my blood boil. "Let's go," I said to her, pulling her gently but firmly away from him. Jake didn't protest. He just stood there, still smirking, as we walked off the dance floor and to the side of the venue. "Why are you doing this?" I didn't know how else to put it. "Why him? Why now?" She tried to look calm, but I could see the slight trembling of her hands. "It's not what you think," she said quickly, her voice defensive, but there was something in her eyes that told me she wasn't being entirely honest. "Jake's just a friend, okay? Nothing happened. We were just having fun. Just fun." I could feel the words coming out of me like venom, but I couldn't stop them. "Fun? Is that why you let him lead you onto the dance floor like that, practically ignoring me? Is that why you told him that he didn't need my permission?" Her expression shifted for a moment, guilt flashing before she quickly replaced it with irritation. "You're overreacting, seriously. Nothing's going on. Why do you always have to make everything a big deal?" That was the moment I knew. I wasn't just overreacting. I wasn't imagining things. There was something going on and I was being lied to, right to my face. But I wasn't sure if I was ready to confront it fully. I needed more. I needed proof. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions, work, home, the usual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. I tried to push it aside, to ignore it like I had before. But the seeds of doubt had already been planted, and they were starting to grow faster than I could manage. I'd always trusted her, but now, I couldn't trust what I was seeing. I started looking at her phone. Yeah, I know it sounds bad. I told myself I wasn't the type to snoop, but I couldn't help myself. There was this one evening when she'd left her phone on the kitchen counter, and I knew she wouldn't be back for at least an hour. My hand hovered over it for a second. I told myself I was just checking if she had any messages from work. But the truth? I was scared. Scared of what I might find. But I did it anyway. I unlocked the phone. Her messages were mostly normal, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, at the very bottom, there was a thread that caught my eye. It was between her and Jake. The messages were short, casual at first, but as I scrolled down, I saw the pattern. The small exchanges turned into late-night texts, one after the other. I remember one of them clearly. "Jake, 1:14 a.m. I can't stop thinking about that kiss we shared last week. Maybe we should do it again." I froze. I wasn't sure if I was reading this right. My hands were shaking, and I had to reread it a few times. That was when I knew for sure. This wasn't just some flirtation. It was something else. And Stephanie? She didn't just let it happen. She participated in it. She was as much a part of it as Jake was. I felt sick, betrayed, like I didn't even recognize the woman I'd married. She'd been living this whole other life, hiding it behind messages and whispered conversations. But even then, I couldn't bring myself to confront her yet. I needed to know more. I needed to piece it all together. I couldn't just have a few texts and some suspicions. I needed undeniable proof. So I did something that still haunts me. I went to her office one evening. She didn't know I was coming. I knew she was working late on a project, so I pretended like I was just dropping by to bring her lunch. Something casual, normal. But when I got there, I saw Jake's car parked outside her building. My stomach dropped. I parked a few spaces away, trying to stay hidden, and just waited. About 15 minutes later, they both walked out of the building. Stephanie was laughing, a real laugh, not the nervous one I'd been hearing for days. And Jake? He was standing too close to her, his hand on the small of her back. I could see them both clearly through the glass of the door. And that was it. That was the moment I finally knew for sure. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, loud and frantic, as I watched them disappear into her car. Couldn't believe it. I didn't know what I was feeling. Anger, heartbreak, a numbness like I was already shutting down. They were together, and she didn't care that I knew. I don't think she cared at all. The drive home that night was a blur. I could barely see through the fog in my mind, but the one thing I knew was that I couldn't let this slide anymore. I couldn't just pretend I didn't know what was happening. I had to confront her. I had to hear it from her mouth. When I walked through the door, everything felt different. The air was heavy. The house felt too quiet. It was like I could physically feel the weight of the lies hanging in the air. Stephanie was in the kitchen, making dinner, acting like everything was perfectly normal. I stood there for a moment, just watching her. I couldn't shake the image of her laughing with Jake, her hand in his. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. "Stephanie," I said, my voice low but firm. She turned, her eyes meeting mine. There was a flicker of something in her gaze. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, but she quickly masked it with that same calm demeanor she always had. "Hey, you're back early. Everything okay?" I didn't answer her. Instead, I pulled out my phone and threw it onto the kitchen counter. The conversation I had found was right there, staring back at us. "Explain this," I said, pointing at the screen. Her face dropped when she saw it. Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. She looked from me to the phone, and then back at me, as if she was trying to figure out how to spin this into something that didn't feel like an impending disaster. "You don't have to see that," she said a little too quickly. "It's not what it looks like." Not what it looks like? I could feel my anger bubbling over, but I wasn't shouting yet. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. What is it then? Just a friendly conversation? A joke? Because it seems pretty damn clear to me. Her shoulders slumped, and I saw the tears welling up in her eyes. She tried to reach out for the phone, but I yanked it away, not willing to let her erase the proof. "Jake and I," she started, her voice faltering. "It was never meant to go this far. I didn't want it to be like this." "You didn't want it to be like this?" My words came out with a sharp edge, and I hated how hurt I sounded. "What does that even mean? You were texting him like that for months, Stephanie. You let him kiss you. You didn't stop him." She looked down, her hands shaking.
"I'm sorry, okay?
"I never meant for you to find out like this. It just happened. Just happened." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. "Just happened," I repeated, my voice cracking slightly. "Is that your excuse? That it just happened? You're not even trying to take responsibility for it." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face now. "I don't know why I did it. It just felt like you weren't there anymore. Like we were just going through the motions. And Jake, he was there. He listened to me when I needed someone. He made me feel like I mattered." Her words stung more than I expected. It was like she was telling me, without saying it outright, that I wasn't enough. That whatever we had built together, all those years, wasn't enough to keep her faithful. I didn't know what to say.